Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. And it all comes down to one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. Well, this is the 9th and second to the last episode in our mini-series on writing with emotion. The series is designed primarily for people who have purchased my book, Writing with Emotion. It is intended as an introduction to that book because the book is very full of terminology, and if you get an introduction and get to understand the terminology before you get to the book, it will make approaching the book a whole lot easier. But because it's a prelude to the book and not duplicating what's in the book, that means that it's useful for anyone who would like an introduction to what do we mean when I say writing with emotion. Because when I talk about writing with emotion, I'm not talking about describing droopy eyes and down-faced mouths. I'm talking about the sources of human decisions, where motivation comes from, and the kinds of emotions that come up in deep thinking and in deep emotional reaction to the driving forces of life. In other words, I'm talking about the kinds of emotions that drive the direction of a story and its emotional impact on the reader. Well, today is the second part of the story arc and how that relates to emotions. And we talk about the arc of emotions because very often the changes that a character undergoes in his personality profile will parallel and sometimes precede the plot points in the story. And when you weave deep character reflection in with events in the physical world, you will end up with a story that is far more fulfilling than if it's merely event-driven. So come on over to the down-facing camera and we'll finish up. How do we go about plotting emotion? See you over there. All right, here we are in our syllabus. We're in part C here, where plot is often driven by changes in emotional profile, where our overview card said that the changes your character experiences in his emotional makeup parallel the story arc and are as important as the plot points themselves, and the emotional profile changes often drive the storyline. We already looked at the first 4 elements where we were saying that the character profile diagram is the way that we can see the story arc because we'll see movement on this diagram. And we said that the character profile diagram would show us what changes were possible because changes go to or from adjacent positions on the character profile diagram. And we made the point that all changes are driven from the rudder position because here in the rudder position where all 3 voices are present is the only place where the character has the ability to make a truly free decision, and only truly free decisions can drive the direction of a story. And finally, we made the point that changes from the other positions cascade from the rudder. So if we have a change where the rudder character trait moves down to the anchor, then the wing will move into the rudder as a cascade, and a pinnacle will move into the wing as a cascade. Now today we're going to do how the arc of emotions traces the movements of related character traits over time. And here we're saying that because character traits can only move one position at a time, longer stories can support longer arcs. And longer arcs also require more supporting character traits. And this is where having a character profile diagram will really help you keep all of these straight. So let's take a look at what we mean. If you have a short story, you might only need a wing trait and a rudder trait. You would test the character in the early part and probably show him failing early, but as your story develops, he will succeed in his rudder trait, and the wing trait will come down into the rudder position where it'll be ready to go for the main test at the high point of your story. So a simple storyline shows the protagonist struggling in vain to tame this wing trait, only to find that it takes dealing with the rudder trait first, and then he can handle the wing trait. If you have a novel, then you've got time enough to develop 3 character traits. You can begin with a pinnacle trait that will have to gradually shift into the rudder position in time for the final battle. You'll have a wing trait that will shift into the rudder position in time for the second battle, and you'll test the rudder trait itself with the first battle. So when you have a whole novel to work with, you can show your protagonist evolving emotionally along with your plot point. Now, an epic novel will give you time for yet another pinnacle trait. This creates the possibility of quite a bit more complexity in your character, and this gives you room and space to have a real character study. And you can really make the character's psychological makeup a primary part of the story. Now, I should point out these green arrows in each of these cases, we're assuming that everything is to the positive, that the character is getting stronger in his emotional strength, and that therefore all of the motion is in the direction of anchoring and making stronger. However, it needs to be pointed out that if you're writing a tragedy, the movement goes in the other direction. So, for example, if you had a novel that was a tragedy, what you'd find is that your base trait would be the one that would be under attack in the final collapse. What was an anchor trait will fall apart in the second collapse, and what was a rudder trait will fall apart in the first collapse. So a tragedy shows the character gradually falling apart, but the same movement rules apply. Rudder drives and the others cascade, only the movement is in the opposite direction. And so to summarize, the arc of emotion traces the movement of related character traits over time. For a short story, you can get by with just a wing and a rudder trait, plus your story plot points. A novel, if it's going to have a strong psychological component, will also require a pinnacle along with the wing and the rudder. An epic novel will give you space and time to add yet another pinnacle trait and really watch how things move in a rearrangement of the psychology of your character. And everything can operate in reverse in the form of a tragedy. Okay, so that's how you can actually track a character's movement across time. You begin with the character profile in its given position, and then you gradually move the character through the arc of the emotions and display how the character changes his character position. Now, when we talked about the individual places, we talked about how you can display where the character is through the voices. So then you simply show the character trait moving to its new position. It can be enormously powerful for your story, and be aware of the places. No matter how action-oriented your story is, your character's going through something in the process of that. Even the biggest superhero has to suit up, has to grab his armaments and go into battle. What's going on in your character's head? You can give your reader so much more of an experience if you will let him inside your characters and inside the battles that they have to face inside their own mind before they can go face the enemy. So that's your writing tip for today. No matter how action-packed your story is, include what your characters are going through emotionally. It will add depth, power, and realism to your story. Tomorrow, we'll conclude this mini-series with an introduction to the character traits. So join us tomorrow, and we'll conclude this series on writing with emotion with where can you get information about the character traits and how would you recognize something that is a character trait. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.